Please welcome Senior Vice President of External Affairs of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, Shannon Colbert.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Restoration is more than rebuilding ecosystems. It is about reclaiming our heritage. When species disappear and habitats decline, we lose more than biodiversity. We risk losing cultural practices, knowledge systems, and identities that have been shaped by generations of stewardship. This next panel will bring us into the world of biocultural preservation, where communities, people, and ecosystems are connecting in powerful and surprising ways. Breakthroughs are emerging that restore habitats, revive traditions, and they strengthen the relationships between people and the waters that they depend upon. CHOW 2026 will demonstrate how restoration can revive living culture and can chart the course and help with our shared resilient future. Valerie Grussing is the Executive Director for Legislative Affairs and Strategic Partnerships at the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. Valerie is committed to protecting Native places through support, guidance, advocacy, and strengthening the partnerships among the Tribal Historic Preservation Officers themselves. She enjoys group projects and that creating collaborative, solutions-focused programming is the way into the future. Valerie is passionate about advocating for and elevating Native interests and voices to stages like CHOW, in revitalizing Native cultures and reclaiming our places. She is honored to be part of the ongoing paradigm shift, grounded in sovereignty, in self-determination, in reconciliation, and in healing. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Valerie Grussing and our esteemed panel.
Hard to see out there. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to our session today. As Shannon said, thank you for that introduction. My name is Valerie Grussing. It's wonderful to be back at CHOW. This is a meaningful return for me and to reconnect with so many familiar faces and old colleagues. From 2009 to 2017, I was at NOAA. I was Cultural Resources Coordinator and Tribal Liaison in the Marine Protected Areas Center as it became part of the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. It was there that I began to work with tribal historic preservation officers who were so gracious in serving as teachers and guiding my efforts, which led in a pretty straight line to my being where I am now. And not being a tribal citizen myself, I'm so humbled and grateful for the opportunity to do this work every day. And I'm also honored to be moderating this discussion today with these expert panelists. I do think Joel's moderator questions got mixed up with mine in the green room, but that's okay, since our panelists are also going to have a lot to say about defining heritage, the importance of Indigenous knowledge, balancing access to sites with protection, stories that have been overlooked, and engaging the next generation. I'm going to ask our panel of experts to introduce yourselves, and as you do, please consider working in an answer to this question. What does the title mean? Restoring heritage and nature. What does that mean to you? Why should heritage be restored in nature? How did they get separated? What happens when they're reconnected? James.
Mahalo, Dr. Grussing. Aloha mai kako. Aloha. What an honor and privilege it was to have Nainoa and Uncle Saul, two of my heroes in this house today. Truly incredible. My name is James Morioka. I am the executive director and co-founder of the Papahānaumokuākea Marine Debris Project, or PMDP. We are a Hawaii-based nonprofit organization that's dedicated to protecting Papahānaumokuākea for the future generations. And so the way we do that is through large-scale marine debris cleanups of the remote reefs, islands, and atolls within the Papahānaumokuākea National Marine Sanctuary. And over the last 5.5 years, we've been able to remove over 1.2 million pounds of marine debris. Thank you. And so, to answer Dr. Grussing's question, restoration for me is to restore the connection that humans have with the natural world. And so, as we heard from Nainoa today, it's really important to build that connection to place and your identity. And as he also mentioned, we're all not so different, you know? We're all connected by the canoes, by the oceans. And so for me, especially with the organization, restoration for me is not only about protecting the coral reefs, but also connecting people to place and then restoring identity and restoring the connection that we have with the wild, with nature.
Hi, everyone. I'm really grateful to be here, to be invited to speak here today. I'm Akeia de Barros Gomes. In about 2 weeks, will be opening a Center for Black History in Newport, Rhode Island, my hometown, and will serve as its director. I am also founding faculty and a lecturer in public humanities in the Simmons Center at Brown University. And something that I usually don't include in my bio, but I think it's absolutely appropriate here. I am also, you could call it a lot of different things, a novice, an adept, a priest in training, a chambasi, a water caretaker at the Temple Ato Ogun in Porto Novo, Benin. And so, unfortunately, fortunately, as summer rolls around, I am not a person that gets to just frolic in the water and enjoy it and treat it as a diversion. But it's my job to protect and tell stories and preserve stories about water as an entity in and of itself. So again, I'm really happy to be here and take part in this conversation. And I think the short and quick answer to your question is, I don't think we should see a difference in heritage and conservation. As you said, at one point they became separated, but for the vast majority of human history, when we lived on a basis of reciprocity, you never take without giving back, heritage was always embedded in conservation.
Well, good morning. My name is Daniel Hayden. I'm president of Restore America's Estuaries. Very happy to be on this panel today and talk about this really important topic. Restore America's Estuaries is a national organization focused on the protection and restoration of estuaries as essential resources for our nation. So key to that is both natural resource management and the integration of people into our projects. So when I think about sort of heritage and conservation, as an organization, we look at this through the lens of what we call our CARE framework, which requires coastal access, because people can only care about things if they've actually experienced it. Resilience, because both the climate changes, but so does society and norms change. And then community engagement, because our coastal resources belong to everybody. So sort of key to thinking about cultural heritage is to really make sure that people have the opportunity and the ability to care about our natural resources. And so all the sort of things that sort of connect people to places are essential to doing this. And of course, this will vary a lot based off where you are and also your cultural background. So it's going to look different for different people in different places, but we can all sort of center on our natural resources.
Thank you for that. Wow, what an honor it is, as you said, to follow Mr. Thompson today. And what a perfect framing for this session as well. I think many of us here are probably more familiar with some of the benefits to ecosystems and species that can come from strengthening and reforging those connections. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. And I'd also like to hear about the benefits to individual and community health that can come from strengthening those connections. And I'd like to start with you, Akeia. In our prep session, it was really powerful to me that you mentioned being a water protector and that water is life. In my work, we see that so frequently. The National Historic Preservation Act, the Section 106 process, is one of the best things that tribal nations have, one of the best ways of protecting places, but it still can be pretty ineffective at times. And so not infrequently, we see tribes out protesting things like pipelines and developments that will impact the water. And that's exactly what they say in Wakoni, water is life. And so benefits to ecosystems as well as to human health from strengthening those connections.
Yeah, I think, and thank you for that question. I think that, one of the things that maybe I should have mentioned, though my introduction was long enough, is that one of my last projects before coming back to Newport was working with Dawnland or New England tribal communities and African communities and communities of African descent in the Dawnland to retell and reframe the Dawnland's maritime history through Black and Indigenous voices. And what would be our history, right, if we had always told it through those voices. And one of the things that became clear in working on that project is there are so many similarities about beliefs in water, and water as a life force, and needing to take care of water, and water being divinely feminine, and the idea that water is a place of creation, just like a woman's womb. And that's why it's most often women that are designated water caretakers or water protectors, because we also have the ability to produce life and produce creation. And one thing that I found very profound on both sides of the Atlantic, whether in West Africa or in the Dawnland, is you frequently hear people say the water in the ocean is no different than the water in a woman's womb. It's the same thing, it's the same salinity, it's a place of creation, it's a place for ancestors. And so I think particularly, and when I say indigenous here, I'm thinking sort of globally indigenous. The idea of connecting back to water as the source of life is essential. And what I mean by that is not so different than what we say in Western science, right? The theory of evolution holds that all life on this planet began in the ocean. And so when I teach about it, I often say indigenous people just happen to know this first, right? Western science didn't catch on until the 19th century. And so I think in making those connections, in regaining that sense of reciprocity that we cannot take from the ocean, we cannot take from lakes and rivers and waterways without replenishing, without giving thanks, without making it whole, we will continue to slip into this process of exploiting beyond repair. And so in order to heal or make it whole, we have to get back to that sense of being reciprocal with water, and not just water, right? Because often we talk about water and land as if they're binary. But one of the things that I always keep in mind is if you go deep enough in the water, you're going to hit land. And if you dig deep enough on land, you're going to hit water. They're complementary and they work together, and we are of both. And I think recognizing that and employing that in our everyday interactions is really, really important. Probably more important than high-level policy change is our individual interactions with land and water.
Thank you. Really powerful. James or Daniel?
Yeah, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
That really makes me think about an old Olelo Noeau, or an ancient Hawaiian proverb, which translates to the land is chief and we are its servants. And it's really built on the foundation of Malama Aina, which is to really take care of the land, and the land's gonna take care of you. And so when it comes to the relationship that we have with the environment, like you said, we are all interconnected. It's really important for us to take care of our water, our land, and to continue to really invest in the youth to be able to carry on that tradition. And so when we think of conservation, we say Aloha Aina work because it's really comes from the heart for us. And so to put your efforts and dedicate your life to the land is not real conservation work, just something that we live.
I think it's an important point is on sort of the policy side, that sort of which comes first, or the practice or the policy. And I think, what we've gone sort of away from is sort of thinking about some of these themes of that, we are dependent on land, water, and air, all of us as human commonalities, and that the sort of the policy isn't sort of reflecting our dependence on those things. And so I think, here we are in DC, is to remind ourselves that, if we care about sort of the quality of the air that we breathe, we care about the water that we drink, and we care about the quality of the food that we all consume, we have to have the policies that support it. And those are grounded both sort of in the practicalities of natural resources, as well as sort of our enjoyment and our spiritual connection to places.
Thank you all. Powerful words. So we talked a little bit about getting back to our title, heritage as well as nature. I want to talk a bit about restoring. Restoring truth and sanity in American history, as directed by this administration, is more than an academic threat. It's been a really big deal in my world, especially coinciding with a major milepost in our nation's history, which is not something that everyone is celebrating, by the way. I just want to put that out there. Can you talk a little bit about the power of telling the full story? You already have a little bit, Akeia, and not just for the sake of storytelling, but to what end? I'll start with you, James.
Yeah, the work that we do is in Papahānaumokuākea. And so I guess I would have to give you a little bit of context as to where we work, Papahānaumokuākea, but it's really telling the story of the Native Hawaiian people. And so Papahānaumokuākea actually extends beyond what you guys may consider to be Hawaii, so the 8 main Hawaiian Islands. And 1,300 miles beyond the 8 main Hawaiian Islands actually make up the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And all these Hawaiian Islands make up the Hawaiian Pai'aina, or the archipelago. And all these islands are strung together, like a lei. But here in Papahānaumokuākea, as described in the Kumulipo, or the Hawaiian creation chant, it describes Hawaii being separated into 2 realms, if you will. Ao, which is the realm of the living, where the people reside and where the 8 main Hawaiian Islands reside, and the realm of Po, which is the realm of the spirits. And so Papahānaumokuākea is telling the story of the creation of the Hawaiian people and of the Hawaiian Islands. And so I know we always talk about here in culture, it's really important to breathe life into the places that we work, to really honor the culture, to honor those that came before us. And for us, we do that through saying Papahānaumokuākea. And so Papahānaumokuākea, sorry not to take up too much time, is you can really break down that word. So Papa is Earth Mother, Wakea is Father Sky, and Hanau means to give birth, and Moku is the islands. And so Papahānaumokuākea is the creation of the Hawaiian Islands and the Hawaiian people. And so when it comes to the place that we work at, it's really important to tell the stories of those that came before us, with the Native Hawaiians having visited Papahānaumokuākea over 1,000 years ago.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, Dana?
So sort of thinking in sort of the context of the 250th anniversary of U.S. independence from the United Kingdom, I think it's important to sort of think the longer context. 250 years is just a very tiny fraction of the living human history in North America. And Europeans came to this continent because of the natural resources in large measure, and they were dumbfounded by the abundance of resources, whether that is the plentiful seas, the amount of oysters, the size of the trees, the open plains, and that sort of continued to sort of bring them forward and come into the U.S., or what's now the United States. And as we depleted those resources, we continued to move west. And I think as we think about it, the celebration or the remembrance of the 250th anniversary, one of the contributions is like our national park system, which is a very complicated history, not without its problems. But they sort of, as they moved westward, they kind of appreciated like how different those landscapes were, and sort of recognized a need to sort of do differently in those places than happened in much of the East Coast. And so when you think about restoration, That's a lot about like returning to where we were and the things we had, and sort of reconciling that our treatment of those resources throughout the U.S. has been largely detrimental, and then through restoration, both in terms of the physical spaces and the social spaces, we can kind of return to something that actually drew many of us here originally.
And I have two pretty brief things. To answer your original question about telling the whole story, one of the really interesting things in the project with Black and tribal communities, my sort of mandate was to be lead curator on an exhibition that told Black and Indigenous maritime histories. And I think what a lot of people thought that exhibit was going to be was about whaling. Because typically when we talk about Black and Indigenous maritime histories, that's where the story starts. But in community conversations, when I went to the communities and I said, what is our maritime story and how do we want to tell it? We actually went back like 20,000 years, right? Because there was a recognition that our maritime histories began before there was even an America. And what was that story, and what was that maritime history, and what were the stories of creation? And as you were speaking, I was thinking about, this theme that we're not so different. In Kikongo, there are two words for our realm and the ancestral realm as well. And the ancestral realm in Pembe is below the water. Like the line on the top of water is the distinction between our space and the space for ancestors, which is also the space for children who haven't been born yet. And so we found that that was also common across the Atlantic with West African communities and Dawnland Indigenous communities. And so, going back to those creation stories, which are not myths, right? They have this deeply embedded ecological knowledge that helps us to survive on a particular landscape. I think going back to those creation stories and appreciating them as such is one important step in this heritage and conservation and returning back to nature.
Beautiful. I'm going to ask one more question about language. And you've already touched on this a bit, but again, this is a really big deal in my world. And we've been involved, NATHPO has been involved in some collaborative efforts about place names too, reconciliation and place names, not just following on Secretary Holland's initiative to remove derogatory names from some places, but there's a lot of places that you might not think about having been named for a person. I'm not just talking about the monument removal movement. But indeed, some places that we've taken our audience to during our conference, their colonial names are a perversion of their original names. If a body of water, a lake, was an especially sacred spiritual place, it's not uncommon for it to be called Devil's Lake now. And so the efforts involved in reclaiming those places, renaming those places, as you said, breathing life of the original language back into the place. Language is the foundation of culture. I'm an anthropologist here. And most indigenous languages are quite literally grounded in the land and the water. Can you tell us some more examples about the importance of place names?
Yeah, I can go first if that's
Sure.
okay. Yeah,
Absolutely.
So I know I talked a little bit about Papahānaumokuākea and the meaning that it has to Hawaiian people. Nainoa earlier talked about the Hawaiian Renaissance, the Renaissance of bringing the Hawaiian language, or Olelo Noeau, or Olelo Hawaii, back to the people. And so I think right now, at least with the designation of Papahānaumokuākea first becoming a marine national monument, and most recently a national marine sanctuary, there's a second wave of Hawaiian Renaissance, and that all goes back to bringing the place names back to Hawaii. And so we work in the Papahānaumokuākea National Marine Sanctuary. There are 10 distinct islands and atolls. You may have heard them through their colonial names, which is Midway Atoll, Pearl and Hermes Atoll, Kure Atoll. But with the naming convention, we've been able to bring the Hawaiian language back, and so they are now referred to by their Hawaiian names first, and that's honoring really the place, the culture, and for all that's going to come. So we call them Kuehilani, Manawai, and Holaniku.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that I've trained myself to say Dawnland or Northeast instead of New England is because I think we often take language for granted. Chief Malerba of the Mohegan tribal nation in Connecticut, and I'm not going to quote her exactly, but she talks about the power of using ancestral language. It's not just words, it's a worldview, and things don't always translate, right, directly. And so, one of the reasons I choose to use Dawnland is because it's an indigenous term for the region, because if you think about the northeastern United States, if you're living on the coast, you're the first people to see the sun. It's the first land that the sun hits, so it's the Dawnland. And if you think about that versus using New England, like what was New England supposed to be? Indigenous people were supposed to be either subdued or disappear, and England was supposed to be recreated on that landscape. And so I try my best not to take that for granted, right? That's what that terminology of the place name means. The other thing that we did in the exhibition, other than using Dawnland, is when we were talking about the Atlantic Ocean, we used a Kikongo word and a Pequot word. We used Pequot because it was the exhibit was on it was at Mystic Seaport Museum, which is on Pequot land. And so whenever we were using indigenous language, we used Pequot language. We used a variety of African languages, but the first two words you see when you entered that exhibit were Kuta and Kalunga. Kuta is a word for ocean or waterway. Kalunga is a Kikongo word for ocean or waterway. And both of these words, what's embedded in both of those words is place for ancestors, place for creation, right? Something that you don't get just by saying ocean or Atlantic Ocean. And so we wanted that power of ancestral language to guide the words that we use throughout the exhibition. And I try to use them whenever I speak, because again, that power in using ancestral language is putting you within that worldview. It's validating it. It's taking it beyond myth and sort of children's stories. So again, you're understanding that deeply embedded ecological knowledge.
Yeah, so place names are sort of a very sort of powerful tool to sort of assert your dominion over something. And so to the extent that so many of our place names in the United States have either come from sort of English names, names of European kings, Spanish kings, sort of shows that sort of history of conquest and sort of efforts to sort of disappear cultures. So certainly very supportive of opportunities, one, to erase sort of the negative names that have come along through our history, as well as look for opportunities to rename things, to sort of respect the fact that there is over 40,000 years of documented, human history in North America, for lack of a better term to describe the space, or lack of my knowledge of a better term. So sort of reasserting sort of new names is an important part of, respecting the entire history of these places.
We used Turtle Island.
Turtle Island.
Turtle Island.
You mentioned worldview. I'm going to build on that before I segue to our next question. One of my favorite examples of this is Chairman Green here today. I saw TJ Green around yesterday. I love that he is a regular participant in this event, and certainly his sister, the deputy Tippo at the Makah tribe, has played a pivotal role in my being where I am today as well. Their museum out at the Makah Nation and Cultural Center several years ago, they decided to reorganize the exhibit space to be based and arranged not on English, but on their language instead, what things are called and what they were used for. And it completely changed the experience. And I thought that was such a simple and elegant and powerful act of sovereignty. It's their museum, it's on their land, and that decision and the changes that it made, I think if you haven't been out there, it's really beautiful for one thing. But their museum is very worth seeing, and I would note that when you do go there. I'm going to reorganize our questions a little bit. And I'm going to ask Daniel to answer first. How do you get people excited about this, and why does it matter? And when I ask that, I'm thinking both of strengthening public support as well as building youth engagement in the movement.
Sure. So, I mean, the most concrete way to get people excited about things is really to make sure that they have experiences in nature. You can't care about things you haven't experienced. You're not going to advocate for things that you don't care about, don't love, or don't appreciate. And it's very hard to do that unless you have like a hands-on experience. So, when we think about sort of public engagement, sort of thinking about like the policy side, we think about sort of all the different ways that different communities experience nature, whether that is, hiking, canoeing, fishing, bird watching, hunting. And so that those are ways that people can get out and appreciate nature and sort of engage in natural resources. And so it's really important, all the sort of activities that sort of activate those things. And so, there's always a lot of conversations about youth. There's obviously a lot of youth programs from, scouting to school groups are really important. And also highlight from a, political perspective, the importance of older voters. I'm not sure that younger people are feeling less engaged with nature than older people. So it's got to be an intergenerational approach to sort of find different ways to make things accessible. So a lot of the things that make, trails and park accessible to less able or older people is also like an important part of expanding the number of people who can experience nature.
Sure.
Okay.
I think you'd be amazed at how just presenting people with something that they can connect to, whether it's from their particular culture, society, or not. One of the things that we had sort of without explanation in the exhibition was a cosmogram that is really this image that's supposed to capture the entire universe and everything in it. And it's basically a circle with a cross through it. And it's circular because for both African and Northeastern indigenous time, it's cyclical, not linear. And when we would tour people through that space, it was amazing that people would come through and say, oh, that's just like a Hopi medicine wheel, or oh, that's just like traditional Chinese medicine, right? With the elements and the time and the life cycles and all of that. And so I think being able to have people relate it to their own experience in that way is really powerful. Another really powerful experience I've had is one of the reasons that the particular house where the Center for Black History is going to be located there is because under the floorboards about 20 years ago, some workers doing some routine maintenance discovered a bundle that an enslaved person had placed underneath the floorboards. And this was, well after enslaved people were Christianized. And it's a bundle that you see throughout the diaspora. It's a bundle that people still use throughout the African continent. You see it throughout, you see it in places like Brazil and in the West Indies and in the American South. My training is in archaeology and anthropology too. You find these bundles all over southern plantations. And bringing people in and talking to them about how this was a source of power for the enslaved, that they did not forego their African spirituality because they adopted Christianity. It became an integral part of their Christianity, and talking about the different components of the bundle, whether it was cowrie shell or broken glass or buttons or beads, and people are just like amazed, right? And the other thing that happens that's quite emotional sometimes is when you talk about these elements of indigenous, Dawnland indigenous or African spirituality, you do encounter what was mentioned in the previous session, that sense of shame. I was recently doing a presentation at a church in New Hampshire on African spirituality, and I explained something that I grew up doing in my family. And I won't get into specifics, but it was something that my grandmother did, and we were told not to talk about it outside of the house because my grandmother was very Catholic, right? And so I'm explaining this practice, and a woman in the church started crying, and she said, my mother did that same thing, and we were told not to tell anyone about it either. And just that idea of, being empowered now to embrace culture and embrace spirituality, whether it's in academics or in preservation or conservation, sort of letting go of that shame and embracing those cultural practices as inherently embedded in nature, embedded in our heritage, I think is another really powerful way to get people who otherwise might be ashamed of those cultural practices or think that they still need to keep them hidden. It's a really powerful way to generate that excitement in that conversation.
Wow. James?
Through my work in Papahānaumokuākea, I think we have an incredibly unique challenge in getting public support and youth engagement, and that is that it's 1,200 miles away from Honolulu. And so that's about half the distance between Hawaii and California, and so it's just really, really far to go. And so to be able to work in Papahānaumokuākea, you have to be permitted either through conservation, research, or education, which is like the Western, I guess, description of science. But also, it's been accepted now that cultural practices in Papahānaumokuākea can. And so with the unique challenge that we have is that we don't have an opportunity to really welcome people into the space. This is a place that, you know, many people will never have an opportunity to visit. Even in Hawaii, you may never ever get a chance to step foot in Papahānaumokuākea. So I think the way we get public support and youth engagement is through bringing the place to the people. And we're able to do that through our storytelling, our visuals, but also through this nonprofit organization, we've been able to bring the people to the place. And so I think just showing pathways to be able to go to a place that's so culturally significant, to be able to reconnect with traditions, to be able to learn about the wildlife and the habitats, and really learn about you know, nature as a whole, being able to love nature because you are a part of nature. And as Nainoa says, it's really easy to protect something that you love. And so at our organization, we're a marine debris removal group, but we do not like to talk about the doom and gloom that is marine debris. It's more about protecting Papahānaumokuākea. And so falling in love with the place and then, you know, taking care of it is just secondary. It just comes easy, if you will.
Beautiful. I always forget that I'm moderating. I'm like impacted by what you're saying. I do want to remind everyone that you should have question cards, and I'm going to try to allow some time for a couple of questions. I am going to retain the last question myself, and while you do that, please write them out, pass them to the end, and they will make their way up here. I've been really inspired by all the talk of connection, all the different types of interconnections. And we are all in this together. So what can you tell us about the role that partnerships play in successful restoration? And that's government, nonprofits, scientists, local communities, indigenous knowledge. What kind of partnerships do you rely on?
Yeah, so I can jump
Go
in
ahead.
real quick. We're a small group. So Papahānaumokuākea Marine Debris Project, we're really a grassroots movement. And so we're a very small team taking care of one of the largest marine protected areas in the world. And so none of that work would be possible without the help of government and indigenous knowledge. And so we're very fortunate to have the support of the National Marine Sanctuaries Foundation, NOAA, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, but also the buy-in from the community. And so using indigenous systems to be able to help manage Papahānaumokuākea is really foundational in our work. For those that are not familiar with Mai Kapo Mai, I encourage you guys to go look up Mai Kapo Mai. It's a Native Hawaiian guidance document to managing Papahānaumokuākea. And to a place that's so culturally significant to Native Hawaiians, it's really important to have the Native Hawaiian lens and the community to hear from the public of how they want to see it protected. And so the way we are able to do our work is, you know, a combination of government, nonprofits, and then, of course, the community that supports us.
Can you say that one more time?
Mai Kapo Mai. It's MAIKOPOMAI, Mai Kapo Mai. It's, it took 10 years to develop because they really had to perfect it, but Mai Kapo Mai is, I think, the benchmark for how, you know, the federal government should look to indigenous knowledge systems and different cultures to embed the two together, to be able to weave them together.
I'm glad you mentioned that, and I want to add one thing too before I turn it back over to you. I think it was really hard fought and important and noteworthy during the Biden administration, and these two things have not been rescinded. They are still the policies of the federal government. The Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, this is still on their website, produced its policy statement on indigenous knowledge. So it is the policy of ACHP, which, like CEQ, oversees all other agencies' implementation of Section 106 within the NHPA. That indigenous knowledge is valid and self-supporting. And similarly, I think it was 22 or 23, the White House Council on Native American Affairs produced a guidance memo that's even longer and more detailed and outlines how this is the policy of the federal government. So if that's something that you think would be useful in your work, it's not on whitehouse.gov anymore, but you can find it if you Google it. And yeah, I encourage you to go check those out. Back to our panelist for this question, partnerships.
Sure. So the question is the important role of partnerships. And I think whether you're a small organization or a big organization, the challenges we're all facing are enormous. And to think that any one organization could do it all by themselves, whether you're the federal government or the most well-funded nonprofit, it's like impossible. So partnerships are essential to us in terms of getting sort of our mission completed. And so, for example, we're working in the Gulf area to restore oyster reefs, and that involves 5 locally driven conservation organizations who get a lot of community support, a lot of community volunteers. We also work with a coastal engineering firm to help us with all the science and the monitoring. We've also brought in sort of some cultural experts to help us understand sort of the cultural context in which these projects are working, and then we rely extensively on the technical support of NOAA and also the regulatory support of NOAA to make sure we're sort of following all the rules and regulations. No single part of the partnership could stand on its own, but it's our ability to work together towards the common goal that makes it possible. And I think that's a model we use in pretty much all the work we do. We definitely can't do it by ourselves.
And I think my co-panelists have said it right. You can't do this work without being in partnership. So I just want to add that the partnerships need to be reciprocal. Often, with the history of conservation, what we've seen is an area is overexploited, and then the burden falls on the steward, the original stewards of the land, marginalized communities. They're told, you can no longer hunt these things, you can no longer use this landscape because now it's polluted, right? And now we need to protect it. And there's this thinking that conservation means clean and pristine and untouched. But that's not how indigenous conservation works, right? It works by utilizing the land in a reciprocal way. And so I think partnering with stewards of the landscape, indigenous people, marginalized people who have a vested interest, right? Because for those of us who are not people of means, when stuff hits the fan, we can't jump on our planes and fly away, right? We're on the landscape. But I don't think that means that the burden of conservation should fall on indigenous folks, people who have been marginalized in order to maintain landscapes. And so again, I think that those efforts really need to be reciprocal and honor indigenous wisdom and validate indigenous wisdom.
Really powerful words. I want to add to that too, but I'm gonna go to a question from the audience. Really good questions, y'all. Thanks. This one really speaks to me, so I'm going to take it first. Restoration efforts are often threatened by or can fail due to extrinsic factors such as those that led to system decline in the first place. For example, climate change and coastal development. How can or should restoration practitioners engage with policymakers, companies, and more to mitigate those stressors and enhance restoration success? Is protest the only option? Yeah, it's interesting. Our annual conference, please check out our website, nathpo.org. We're going to Albuquerque in August. Everyone is welcome. We encourage you to join us and meet tribal historic preservation officers, learn about the work that they do. Last year, we did a session on exactly this in an era of deregulation. are there other pressure points in the system that can be used and leveraged at this time? And one of the things that we wanted to highlight was the equator principles. I encourage you to look that up if you have not heard of these things. It's international standards for lenders, for finance, that are intended to help the U.S. When President Obama endorsed the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that came with a caveat that all of these wonderful human rights provisions are important and necessary, but in the US, we can't really do free, prior, and informed consent, you understand. And without that, the rest of it is sort of questionably meaningful. But for the equator principles, I think that's something that I would like to see that conversation spread and grow, because I think there is a role for the people who lend the money for projects to play in this as well. And that's my editorial note. Is protest the only option? How can practitioners engage with policymakers and companies to help mitigate these stressors and enhance restoration success?
So I'll maybe start, and then you all can add on to it. I mean, I think we think about, we have like the highly built environment, and you have the less built environment. Very little of it's pristine, so to speak. It probably never really was, and certainly isn't now. And then there's kind of the in-between spaces. We cannot, as a practical matter, eliminate sort of our need for a built environment. So you have to have some kind of interaction with the people who own and manage the sort of built environment, whether that's talking about buildings, hotels, and energy infrastructure, ports. All those people need to be engaged and part of the process. So some of the tools there exist, of course. You have the regulatory frameworks, which are not as strong as they should be or could be. So that's sort of a longer-term, political choice that we have made, for better or for worse. Secondly, you think about opportunities. You mentioned finance is important. Increasingly we're seeing insurance is important, that insurance companies just simply look at the cost of insuring coastal properties or properties in fire zones and will no longer underwrite them, which will drive sort of the real estate markets. And you can think about at a local level, like all the zoning changes that can happen in terms of like natural resource management, open spaces. You're seeing it today with people sort of responding to data centers and the amount of resources those consume at a national level, but in particular at a local level. And that sort of local engagement has actually been much stronger than a national or even state level engagement. So there's a lot of different tools. And you just have to sort of look at each situation and think about what's going to be the most powerful thing. So in some cases, protest is going to be a part of that. In other cases, sort of collaboration is going to be a part of it. In other cases, it's going to be regulation to the extent you can do that.
I'll speak about our work again, but when it comes to our organization, we're very action-based, and so we don't have the capacity to do a lot of policy advocacy work or protesting. But what we try and do is we try and tell the story of what we see. When it comes to marine debris, it's really easy to point the finger at the consumer or at other nations that may be polluting our waters, but really, it shouldn't be on the consumer. We got to put it back on the manufacturer. And then when it comes to, I guess, your own life, it's really the thing I would encourage you to do is to see what you use in your daily life and see what you can eliminate, because it's a supply and demand issue. When you're talking about mass fishing extraction through trawl fishing, if you are supporting those kind of industries, you're also supporting the gear and the gear loss that may be washing into Hawaii. So our thing is about finding a fisherman and befriending a fisherman to get, fish to provide for your home, but to really put your dollars where you want to see them spent.
And I hope my answer doesn't come across as doom and gloom, but I really think any sort of significant change requires system change. Because I completely agree with what you said, but I can also recognize that if I'm a person living hand to mouth, I'm always going to go for the less expensive option, which is usually the most harmful option, right? And also, if I'm a person who is living hand to mouth, I might not have that free time or the luxury of protesting because I've got to get to work and I've got to feed my family, right? And so what we're really talking about is a systemic shift that deals with all of the, it deals with things in a more holistic way. But in the meantime, right, we need to think about the way we are behaving and the way we are consuming and the way we are interacting. But I really do think it comes down to a system shift where we are incentivizing conservation, where we are incentivizing better economic choices, as opposed to, again, leaving it to the consumer. Because if I can't afford to buy fair trade and things that take care of the land, I can't, right? And so what do I then do about it? So again, I hope that's not doom and gloom, but.
Not at all. And I'll give you a chance for redemption. You also segued to my last question. I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. Thank you for the wonderful questions that have been submitted by the audience. I'm sorry that we're not going to be able to get to more, but please come find us if you would like to engage in discussion about these topics. For our last question, I'm going to go back to restore again from the session title. In my world, this question has come up independently in 3 different places that we sort of sit in the middle of the Venn diagram of tribal historic preservation officers wear a lot of different hats and have a foot in both worlds in multiple ways. And that's historic preservation. There's a tribal homelands coalition that has formed in the past year or so, and also public lands. A coalition that's formed on that front is called Ground Shift. And I want to bring this question into the space too, to hear our panelists' perspectives and to get you all thinking about it. In the midst of the current destruction that is happening on so many fronts, as we consider the vision of a better future, and that day will come, it has to. I'm breathing life into it. What should our goals be? Was the system really working well for everyone? Was it working for the ecosystems and the resources? Is the best we can hope for simply to restore things as they were? Sometimes a storm comes to clear our path. The mission of the Sanctuaries Foundation is Waters for All, and you all have mentioned some elements of your vision for continuing to improve that here. How can we take what we've heard and make sure it's foundational in our collective planning now? And how do we move from success stories to systemic change? It's like we planned.
Stepped right into it. I think, and I'll go back to the part of my work that is centered in Porto Novo, Benin. And one of the things that is foundational, that's been foundational to my practice for like 15 years, is beyond that thinking about reciprocity. Things are reciprocal, whether you recognize it or not. You can't take anything without sacrificing something. And when we think about the system that we're in, things are being sacrificed, right? It might not, the person who is the most well off, and I'll say that loosely, well off financially, that person might not be reciprocating or sacrificing personally, but something's being sacrificed, right? And so the land's going to react, and the water's going to react, and those who are of fewer means are the ones that are actually being sacrificed, right? And so, I think getting back to those systems of reciprocity, where in your everyday interactions you are not taking without giving something back, is essential. Right? That's how we survived for 100,000 years, by making sure we were being reciprocal with land, water, ancestors, et cetera. And we've gotten so far away from that because it's so difficult to do in the current system. And so, there are policy level things that need to happen to make that a reality, but we can all also do it in our everyday interactions, because it's very easy for me to go buy a cup of coffee and throw it into the garbage and not think about where it ends up or who was producing it or where the sugar is coming from. But if I make myself do that, I'll be more conscious about what I purchase and how I interact with people and what I use. So we can start on a smaller scale, but eventually it's going to have to be larger scale.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So the question has sort of many layers to it, but I sort of zoomed in on the word restoration because that's the name my work, Restore America's Estuaries is right there. And I think we focus a lot on restoration, but really most importantly, sort of the protection piece. You don't need to restore something if you had protected it in the first place, so there needs to be more done just in terms of protection. And restoration has its limits. One of our partner organizations, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, in their analysis of the Chesapeake Bay, they estimated that sort of in the best case scenario, the bay can get to about 70 to 80% of its ecological health that it had pre-colonial times. So sort of the best case scenario for the Chesapeake Bay is about 80% restoration, which kind of makes you wonder where it is today. So restoration unto itself isn't enough. That's just sort of better than nothing. So protection's kind of the key thing there. And your question of whether you look at sort of the political environment over the last 2 years, the last 6 years, or 60 years, is it good enough? There's been periods that are better than others, but certainly not good enough if you think about the arc of U.S. history and what we've done to our natural landscapes and what we could do and what we could benefit from. So I think it's really important for us to think about what that vision of what our country could look like. We typically think about sort of very simple message terms. It's like, all our waters should be fishable, and all our waters should be swimmable, and all our waters should be accessible to everybody because they belong to everybody. So if we kind of agree on sort of those sort of vision points, and that's, there's other things that can be added to that, that gives us sort of a pathway to something much better than we've experienced in the last 2 years, 20 years, or 200 years.
James, last word.
Yeah, I wish I had a great answer for this. We are a small group, so bringing small success stories to systemic change has been really difficult for us. Being in Hawaii, I think it's really important to be able to think globally but act locally within your own communities. And I have 2 young daughters, and I always think about what the oceans are going to look like when they're my age. And so as I continue forward with my work, I hope to be able to be the role model that the community can look towards into really wanting to protect the space to be able to make global change. And when you think about Hawaii and our coral reefs, there's so many different complex issues when it comes to climate change, sea level rise, ocean acidification. But what I know I can do with my hands and my skill set is to be able to remove fishing nets off the coral reefs. And so I hope that I can inspire the next generation to really want to take care of Hawaii and take care of our waters, take care of our land, so they can help really make systemic change. So what we're trying to do is just do that through our storytelling, our data collection, and really hope for the best.
Amazing. Well, that is our time for today. Opportunity, if there's anything we didn't cover, any parting words you want to leave folks with?
I want to change my answer a little bit. Something popped into my mind that I've mentioned in a previous conversation, and it's sort of related to that idea of picturing water as womb, earth as mother, water as mother. And something that I recently learned about is this thing called microchimera, and I hope I'm pronouncing it the right way. But apparently, when a woman is pregnant, some of the DNA from the fetus goes into the mother.
I've done that test.
Yeah, and so it's why, women like me who have sons, you have like male DNA because you've had a son. And at its best, microchimera heals your body. You heal faster. You recover from illness quicker. You think faster, right? You're better off. But the other side of that story is microchimera can be parasitic and cause autoimmune disease. And so using that analogy of earth as mother, water as womb, if we are microchimera, we are at a point where we need to make that choice. Are we going to be parasitic? Are we going to continue to be parasitic? Or are we going to heal and make whole? So I just wanted to say that because it's a cool analogy. And it's something that I just learned, so I like to show off knowing new words and stuff.
That's amazing. And with that, you brought our discussion full circle. Please thank our expert panelists today, and thank the Sanctuary Foundation for this opportunity. I really enjoyed this. I've taken some notes myself, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you to our incredible panelists. That session was so full of wisdom. It has me with goosebumps because I feel like all of the things that our team has wanted to bring out, you guys touched upon each of those and connected them so beautifully. So I want to genuinely thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm like very moved right now. We always try at the foundation to think about how we bring connection forward, right? Because that's love, that's responsibility, kuleana. That's how you look at responsibility and stewardship. That's how you look at action. That's how you look at how you ask how you can support something, how you can be part of something, how you can be a driver personally, individually, but also, as you guys each reminded us, this is a collective. And this is why we look at Capitol Ocean Week is, we are not the doers. We are the ones who want to bring up people from the front lines who are asking the questions, building the bridges and looking at how restoration is the need, and protection and conservation and use and respect is the need first and foremost. If we don't have those pieces together, we cannot have collective action. We cannot have movements. And that is the grounding that I think we all want to be part of. We want to be part of the movement and think about how our individual actions and our collective actions can make a difference. So I just want to thank you again from the bottom of my heart for all of those. I think it gives a lot of us things to think about and how we make sure that we all celebrate and think how we help each other. And I also want to make sure that we think about how we can help and give back to the folks who have also helped to make CHOW possible, each and every one of you being here, as well as our virtual audience who's joining us to be part of the collective conversation and the actions forward. How we also make sure that we thank our partners like NOAA, who have been here through all of it as well and have a long way to go still. But also how we thank the folks who have made this possible and keep CHOW free and open to the public because of even their support, and they all do it in different ways. So even our sponsors like Yamaha, the National Marine Manufacturers Association, Perkins Coie, the Marine Mammal Commission, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, Orsted, AFCO, National Park Foundation, National Nature Conservation Conservancy Audubon, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, New England Aquarium, Ocean Conservancy, National Wildlife Federation, Tito's, American Sport Fishing Association, Worry Free Plastics, I promise we're almost there, Bonefish Tarpon Trust, DEEP, the Henry Foundation, the Summit Foundation, Stream Your Dreams. I'm so proud to say that group. It shows the breadth of the coalitions and the support we have. Those are not always names that you expect to see alongside each other, but that's really what CHOW brings together, is how do we bring the expertise, the knowledge, the wisdom, but also the support who want to make sure that we have these kinds of convenings because we are people, we need that connection, that's our energy. And I hope that each of you will take the time right now to put that energy into your own footsteps and think about how you can take the wisdom that we've been blessed with, but also carry it forward. We've had 25 years of Capitol Ocean Week. We know each and every year becomes a relevant point for us, but it is one point, it is one moment. And so it really is upon each of us to think about how we're going to use that wisdom and that movement to drive us forward. So I hope you'll continue to join us for the rest of Capitol Ocean Week, but think really hard about what you're hearing and the experiences and thinking about the ways that you can get engaged with each of these partners that we have, whether it's learning and making that connection, sharing that with someone else that you're going to meet outside of these walls, but being sure that you bring it back into how do we make this world a better place. So with that, I want to say thank you again to our panel. Thank you to each of you for being here. And I hope that you'll join us again after lunch at 1:15 for our next session on serving America's working waterfronts, bringing it back into some of the frontline communities as well on our waterfronts. So thank you.